Hollywood has always been a dream factory, a place where the lights shine brightest and the shadows fall deepest. From the 1920s to the 1950s, the golden age of cinema wasn't just about movies, it was about myths. Movie studios carefully crafted their stars, polishing their images until they gleamed like diamonds under the spotlight. But behind every perfect smile and every glamorous premiere, there lurked something darker. Gossip, rumors, scandal. In an industry obsessed with beauty and desire, nothing sold better than a story whispered in the dark, especially when it was about a woman's love life. This was the era when the public couldn't get enough of who was sleeping with whom, when the tabloids thrived on half-truths and innuendo, and when studio heads quietly fueled rumors to keep their stars burning bright in the public imagination. These weren't just actresses, they were icons of seduction, painted as irresistible, untamable, and in the cruel language of gossip, women who supposedly slept with everyone. Of course, Hollywood's favorite trick was exaggeration. Sometimes the stories were wild inventions. Sometimes they were fragments of truth, blown up until they became legend. But whether true or false, the effect was the same. These women were immortalized not only for their talent, but also for their alleged scandalous appetites. It was a trap and a gift all at once. Their reputations made them unforgettable, but they also weighed heavily on their real lives. Imagine opening a magazine in the 1930s or 1940s. You wouldn't just see film posters or glowing reviews. You'd see bold headlines about affairs, secret marriages, drunken nights, and whispered encounters behind velvet curtains. Hollywood knew what the public wanted, and it wasn't just movies. It was sex, scandal, and the intoxicating idea that these goddesses on screen were as wild in real life as they were glamorous on film. And who were the queens of this glittering, gossip-driven empire? They were the women we're about to explore tonight. Women who lit up the screen and scandalized the press. Women who redefined what it meant to be a star, and in doing so, found themselves branded as Hollywood's most seductive legends. First, there's Marilyn Monroe, the eternal blonde bombshell. Her name alone conjures up images of red lipstick, a wind-blown white dress, and a smile that could melt the world. To her fans, she was the woman every man desired. To the tabloids, she was the starlet linked to lovers from baseball heroes to presidents. Marilyn's life was lived in the cruel spotlight of fame. Her romances dissected until they became myth. Then comes Mae West, the original queen of double entendre. With her sultry voice and wicked wit, she made innuendo an art form. While censors tried to silence her, she leaned into her scandalous persona, turning every rumor into a punchline. Mae didn't just play the game, she owned it. Tallulah Bankhead was something else entirely. Larger than life, with a husky voice and a wit sharp enough to cut steel, she shocked audiences both on stage and off. Known for her outrageous quotes and rumored affairs with both men and women, Tallulah didn't just feed the rumor mill. She gleefully poured champagne into it. Then we have Ava Gardner, the small-town girl who became one of MGM's most glamorous stars. Married to Mickey Rooney, Artie Shaw, and Frank Sinatra, and linked to countless others, Ava was painted as the untamable femme fatale of Hollywood. To the public, she was the goddess who lived fast, loved hard, and left behind a trail of broken hearts. And finally, Marlene Dietrich, the German-born siren whose allure crossed borders and genders. She wore men's suits, seduced audiences with her smoky voice, and left the world wondering about her lovers. Rumors that stretched from Hollywood to Europe, from powerful men to glamorous women. Marlene was more than a star. She was a mystery wrapped in silk and shadows. These 5 women, Marilyn, Mae, Tallulah, Ava, and Marlene, were more than just actresses. They were symbols of an era, icons of desire, and victims of the very publicity machine that made them famous. Their lives were a tightrope walk between truth and myth, their reputations a mixture of brilliance and scandal. So tonight we're not just watching movies. We're pulling back the velvet curtain and stepping into the whispers of old Hollywood. We'll explore the stories, the rumors, and the legends that turned these women into immortal figures of seduction. Were they really as wild as the tabloids claimed? Or were they simply caught in a system that used their bodies, their beauty, and their private lives to keep the cameras flashing. Whatever the answer, one thing is certain: Hollywood never forgot them. And neither will we. She was born Norma Jean Mortensen, a little girl who spent most of her childhood drifting between foster homes and an orphanage in Los Angeles. She didn't come from privilege nor from connections. Her mother battled mental illness, her father was absent, and her young life was marked by uncertainty and loneliness. But out of that fragile beginning, the world witnessed the transformation of a girl next door into Marilyn Monroe, the most recognizable sex symbol in Hollywood history. Hers was not just a rise to fame. It was the invention of an icon. The platinum hair, the breathy voice, the curve of her smile, all became part of a carefully constructed persona that would outlive her. But it came with a price. Once she became Marilyn, the world no longer wanted to see Norma Jean. When she first entered the film industry in the late 1940s, Monroe was typecast as the bubbly blonde, the flirtatious beauty who turned men's heads. The studios saw her appeal instantly, though it took years for her to break through. By the early 1950s, she was starring in Niagara, Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, and How to Marry a Millionaire, movies that cemented her as the embodiment of desire. The press couldn't get enough. Reporters wrote as much about her figure as they did about her acting. Critics often dismissed her talent, but audiences adored her. And the more the public desired Marilyn, the more the studios leaned into the idea of her as Hollywood's most irresistible woman. Yet with stardom came the machine of scandal. Every move Marilyn made became tabloid fodder, and nowhere was this more evident than in her love life. She married 3 times, and each union turned into headline drama. Her first marriage, at just 16, was to James Dougherty, a factory worker. It ended quietly when she pursued modeling and film. But her second marriage, to baseball legend Joe DiMaggio, was anything but quiet. Together they were America's golden couple, the Yankee Clipper and the blonde goddess. Their wedding in 1954 was front-page news, and so was their split just 9 months later. The tabloids pounced on the story that DiMaggio couldn't handle her fame, that jealousy tore them apart, especially after the infamous subway grate scene in The 7-Year Itch, when Monroe's white dress billowed into film history. Her third marriage was to playwright Arthur Miller, a man celebrated for his intellect rather than his brawn. The union was hailed as beauty marrying brains, but it too unraveled under the harsh spotlight of fame and her struggles with insecurity. The press painted her as unstable, desperate for love, incapable of lasting happiness. Behind those headlines, Monroe wrestled with miscarriages, a sense of inadequacy, and the crushing weight of being both adored and objectified. But beyond her marriages, it was the rumors of affairs that truly fed the scandal machine. The most infamous whispers linked her to President John F. Kennedy and, after him, his brother Robert Kennedy. Though never proven, the idea of Marilyn entangled with the most powerful men in America became part of her legend. Her sultry rendition of "Happy Birthday, Mr. President" in 1962 only fanned the flames. For the tabloids, this was the perfect story. The world's most desired woman allegedly sharing secret nights with the nation's most powerful leaders. It was irresistible, and it fixed her forever as the woman who supposedly slept with everyone. The frenzy wasn't just about names and faces. It was about the fantasy of Marilyn herself. She became the symbol of ultimate desirability, the woman every man wanted and every woman was told to envy. Magazines breathlessly speculated about who she was dating, who she was seen with, who might be next. Her image was plastered everywhere: billboards, magazines, advertisements. And the more they painted her as the ultimate temptress, the less room there was for Norma Jean, the girl who still longed for stability, respect, and love. Yet behind the image of the ditzy blonde was a woman who was far more complex. Monroe was not only ambitious but also deeply committed to becoming a serious actress. She studied at the Actors Studio in New York under Lee Strasberg, working hard to be taken seriously in an industry that only saw her as decoration. Her performance in Bus Stop in 1956 was praised by critics, proving that she had more to offer than just a wiggle and a smile. But the industry, and the gossip that fueled it, rarely allowed her that dignity. To the public, she remained the sex symbol. To her, that title was both her greatest triumph and her greatest prison. Her vulnerability was another side rarely acknowledged during her lifetime. Marilyn battled depression, anxiety, and addiction to prescription drugs. Those close to her often described a woman who was intelligent and sensitive, but also deeply insecure. The Hollywood machine demanded perfection, and when she faltered, it only intensified the rumors. Every delayed shoot, every breakdown on set, became another headline, feeding the narrative that Marilyn Monroe was spiraling out of control. The more human she became, the more the world wanted to turn her back into a myth. And myth is exactly what she became. On August 4, 1962, Marilyn Monroe was found dead from a barbiturate overdose at just 36 years old. The coroner ruled it a probable suicide, but her death, like her life, was surrounded by mystery and speculation. Was it an accident? Cry for help? Something more sinister? The unanswered questions only added to her legend. In death she became eternal. Her films continued to play, her photographs continued to sell, and her image continued to be marketed. But more than that, her reputation as the ultimate seductress solidified. She became Hollywood's eternal sex symbol, the woman who embodied both the dream and the nightmare of fame. Why does Marilyn Monroe remain the poster child of Hollywood scandal? Because her life encapsulated everything the Golden Age represented: beauty, desire, power, and tragedy. She was adored, objectified, and consumed by a world that refused to see the woman behind the image. The rumors of her lovers, the headlines about her marriages, the speculation about her affairs, all of it made her larger than life. Even today, decades after her passing, her name still evokes whispers of seduction, scandal, and mystery. In truth, Marilyn wasn't the woman who slept with everyone. She was the woman who Hollywood turned into the symbol of everyone's desire. She was both the fantasy and the warning, the dream and the cautionary tale. To watch her on screen is to see perfection. To read about her life is to understand the crushing weight of that perfection. Marilyn Monroe remains unforgettable not because of who she may or may not have loved, but because she showed us the price of becoming an icon in a world that devours its legends. Mae West wasn't just an actress. She was a force of nature. Born Mary Jane West in Brooklyn in 1893, she grew up in a working-class family that encouraged her natural charisma and fearlessness. From an early age, she showed a knack for performance, entering talent shows and captivating audiences with her timing and charm. By the time she was a teenager, she had stepped onto the vaudeville stage, where her wit and boldness set her apart. Vaudeville was noisy, raucous, and daring, but even there Mae seemed too big to contain. She wasn't content with just being another pretty face singing a tune. She had ideas, lines, and a persona that challenged the very notion of how a woman was supposed to behave in public. In a world where women were expected to be demure, Mae leaned into seduction. She made innuendo her weapon of choice. She didn't just deliver lines. She made them drip with suggestion, bending words into winks and smirks that turned audiences into co-conspirators. And the magic of Mae West was that she often wrote those lines herself. In the 1920s, she began writing plays that carried her unmistakable stamp, stories thick with sensuality, humor, and a rebellious spirit that dared to say what others only whispered. One of her earliest plays, Sex, landed her in jail for corrupting the morals of youth. But even that scandal only added to her fame. Mae understood something fundamental. Controversy was currency in show business, and she was rich with it. By the early 1930s, Hollywood was calling. The film industry was exploding with sound pictures, and Mae's unique voice, husky, deliberate, charged with innuendo, was perfect for the screen. In 1932, she signed with Paramount Pictures and made her first film, Night After Night. Although she had only a small part, she stole the show with lines she wrote herself. One in particular became legendary. When a woman comments, "Goodness, what beautiful diamonds you have," Mae, dripping with mock innocence, replies, "Goodness had nothing to do with it, dearie." With that single quip, she announced herself as Hollywood's new queen of double meanings. She quickly rose to stardom with films like She Done Him Wrong, 1933, and I'm No Angel, 1933. These movies didn't just showcase Mae's wit. They cemented her as the bawdy, unapologetic seductress who bent men to her will. And the public loved it. At a time when the Great Depression was grinding down spirits across America, Mae West's sultry humor was an escape. She was the woman who didn't play by the rules, who could outsmart the men in her life with a single line and a sly look. Audiences didn't just laugh at her. They admired her boldness, secretly wishing they could be as free. But Mae West's rise coincided with Hollywood's tightening morality. In 1934, the Motion Picture Production Code, better known as the Hays Code, was strictly enforced. It was designed to clamp down on sexual content, profanity, and anything deemed immoral. In other words, it was designed to stop Mae West. Her scripts, packed with suggestive lines and playful innuendo, were suddenly under siege. Studios scrambled to tone her down, censors slashed at her dialogue, and critics accused her of dragging Hollywood into the gutter. Yet Mae didn't back away. She cleverly found ways to slip innuendo past the censors, twisting words until their double meanings couldn't quite be pinned down. She once joked, "I believe in censorship. I made a fortune out of it." And she wasn't lying. Every attempt to silence her only made her more famous. Mae West's image as a woman who slept with everyone wasn't entirely born from truth. It was the result of her persona. She wasn't shy about her sexuality, and in a time when women were expected to hide such things, that made her scandalous. But Mae was also a master of self-promotion. She understood that letting the world believe she was wild and insatiable only made her more magnetic. She often exaggerated her love life, giving the press just enough to chew on while keeping her private reality to herself. For Mae, sex wasn't a scandal, it was power. She used gossip the way she used punchlines, turning whispers into headlines, and headlines into box office gold. Her flamboyant reputation also made her an easy target for rumors. Every male co-star was painted as a lover, every late-night party a tryst. But unlike many actresses who fought against scandal, Mae leaned into it. She owned it. She made the gossip part of her act, never denying it, never apologizing. By doing so, she flipped the script. Instead of being shamed, she became celebrated for her boldness. She wasn't the victim of rumors. She was the author of them. Her cultural impact cannot be overstated. Mae West redefined what female sexuality could look like on screen. She wasn't the submissive ingenue or the tragic femme fatale. She was in control, witty, and unafraid of desire. She cracked jokes about men, marriage, and sex at a time when those subjects were supposed to be taboo for women. She gave audiences permission to laugh about what society told them was unspeakable. And in doing so, she influenced generations of performers. From Madonna to Lady Gaga, the lineage of bold, sexually confident women in entertainment can be traced back to Mae West. Even as her film career waned after the 1940s due to censorship and changing tastes, Mae reinvented herself on stage and later in Las Vegas, where her campy, provocative performances drew huge crowds. She never let go of her persona. Even into her 70s, she was still delivering lines with the same twinkle in her eye. To the end, she remained Mae West, the woman who turned suggestion into art, who never let scandal scare her, and who proved that sexuality and humor could be a woman's greatest weapons. When she died in 1980, Mae left behind not just a body of work, but a legend. She was more than a star, she was an idea. An idea that a woman could own her sexuality, laugh in the face of censorship, and build a career not despite the rumors, but because of them. Mae West may never have been the woman who literally slept with everyone, but she was the woman who made the world believe she could. And in that belief she found her power. To this day, her famous line still lingers in pop culture. "Why don't you come up and see me sometime?" It wasn't just an invitation, it was a challenge. A challenge to a world that tried to silence her, and to audiences who couldn't resist her. Tallulah Bankhead was born to privilege, but she lived as though the rules had never applied to her. Born in 1902 in Huntsville, Alabama, Tallulah came from a powerful Southern family. Her father, William B. Bankhead, would go on to serve as Speaker of the House of Representatives. Her grandfather had been a U.S. Senator. The Bankheads were respected, wealthy, and steeped in politics. By all accounts, Tallulah could have lived a comfortable, conventional life as a Southern belle, marrying well and enjoying the quiet luxury that her family's name provided. But Tallulah had no interest in being proper, no desire to blend into the wallpaper of polite society. From a young age, she wanted one thing: attention. And she would stop at nothing to get it. When she set her sights on Broadway, it was clear she had both the talent and the charisma to succeed. With her striking looks, tall frame, and smoky voice, Tallulah lit up the stage in the 1920s. She was witty, fearless, and larger than life, commanding the theater with her very presence. Audiences adored her, critics praised her, and fellow actors couldn't take their eyes off her. She became known as Broadway's wild child, a performer whose off-stage antics were as entertaining as her roles. But what made Tallulah truly unforgettable wasn't just her performances, it was her complete refusal to censor herself. Tallulah spoke in quotes that seemed tailor-made for scandal sheets. She had a gift for shocking lines that mixed wit, charm, and sheer audacity. Perhaps her most famous was, "My father warned me about men and booze, but he never mentioned women and cocaine." With one sentence, she summed up her entire reputation. She drank heavily, she experimented with drugs, and she openly pursued affairs with both men and women at a time when Hollywood desperately wanted its stars to appear wholesome. But Tallulah didn't care. She lived loudly and publicly, her personal life spilling across gossip columns in a steady stream of outrageous behavior. Rumors of her affairs were endless. She was linked romantically to actors like Gary Cooper and Charles Laughton, but she was also said to have flings with a host of actresses, including Greta Garbo, Marlene Dietrich, and Billie Holiday. Whether or not all of these rumors were true, Tallulah never bothered to deny them. In fact, she seemed to enjoy feeding the gossip. She once quipped, "My vices are my religion." And indeed, she practiced them with near-religious devotion. She was also notorious for her openness about her bisexuality, something unheard of in an era when Hollywood went to great lengths to cover up even the slightest hint of scandal. Tallulah didn't just admit it, she flaunted it. This audacity fascinated the tabloids. They painted her as a woman who had slept with nearly everyone in Hollywood, male or female. Unlike Marilyn Monroe, who struggled under the weight of such rumors, Tallulah laughed at them. She made her excesses part of her brand, building a persona as the most outrageous woman in show business. If Mae West winked and teased, Tallulah threw the door wide open and dared you to look. When Tallulah transitioned to Hollywood films in the 1930s, her flamboyant reputation followed her. She starred in movies like Devil in the Deep, 1932, alongside Gary Cooper and Charles Laughton, and Alfred Hitchcock's Lifeboat, 1944, where her husky voice and commanding presence captivated audiences. But for the studios, Tallulah was a double-edged sword. She brought star power, but she also brought scandal. Producers couldn't control her, and censors despised her. Off-camera, she was just as wild as her screen image suggested, often showing up late, hungover, or in the company of lovers the studio would have preferred stayed in the shadows. Her voice, low and raspy from years of smoking and partying, became one of her trademarks. It added to her allure, but it was also symbolic of the toll her lifestyle took on her body. Alcohol, drugs, and late nights were part of her daily routine. She could be unpredictable, sometimes hilariously charming, other times difficult and erratic. Yet even in her darkest moments, Tallulah had a wit that kept people enthralled. Once, when asked why she drank so much, she replied with a smirk, "Because it's the only thing that keeps me from killing myself." Lines like that cemented her reputation as both tragic and magnetic. The tabloids devoured her excesses. Stories about her drunken escapades, her flirtations at parties, and her sharp tongue filled the gossip pages. She didn't just give Hollywood scandal, she gave it with a flourish. Where others tried to hide their indiscretions, Tallulah seemed to revel in hers. This made her both a nightmare and a dream for Hollywood's publicity machine. A nightmare because she defied the carefully controlled images studios crafted for their stars. A dream because she kept her name in the headlines, ensuring that audiences never forgot her. Tallulah's romances and rumored liaisons were endless fodder. She allegedly had flings with politicians, writers, and socialites, in addition to the actors and actresses she surrounded herself with. When pressed about the long list of names attached to her, she once shrugged and said, "It's the good girls who keep diaries. The bad girls never have the time." That was Tallulah in a nutshell. Unapologetic, witty, and utterly unafraid of judgment. But behind the flamboyance, there was also a deeply complex woman. Tallulah's addictions were real and destructive, and they often left her physically and emotionally drained. She struggled with depression, health issues, and the loneliness that can come with a life lived at full volume. She played the role of the scandalous seductress so well that many forgot there was a person beneath the persona. For all her bravado, Tallulah wrestled with vulnerability, often masking pain with humor and spectacle. Still, she left an indelible mark on Hollywood. At a time when most women were forced to hide their desires, Tallulah put hers on display. She shocked the establishment not just because of her affairs, but because she made no effort to apologize for them. She lived as though secrecy was a burden she had no interest in carrying. And in doing so, she became a symbol of defiance. Tallulah Bankhead remains one of the most unforgettable figures of the Golden Age. She was a woman who broke rules, shattered taboos, and lived life on her own scandalous terms. Her husky laugh, her cutting one-liners, and her endless stream of gossip-worthy adventures made her the darling of Hollywood excess. She wasn't afraid of being labeled, mocked, or misunderstood, because she knew that, in the end, people would never stop talking about her. And perhaps that was exactly what she wanted. For Tallulah, to be remembered was to win. And remembered she is. Not as a quiet starlet who followed the rules, but as the wild child of Broadway and Hollywood, the woman who shocked an entire industry simply by being herself. Ava Gardner's story is one of transformation. An ordinary girl from rural North Carolina who rose to become one of the most glamorous and scandalous stars in Hollywood. She was born in 1922 in the tiny town of Grabtown, the daughter of poor tobacco farmers. Life in her early years was marked by hardship, the kind of simplicity and struggle that seemed galaxies away from the glittering lights of Hollywood. But even as a child, Ava possessed a beauty that set her apart. Neighbors noticed her striking green eyes, her full lips, and a presence that seemed to radiate even when she was simply walking down a dusty country road. Her path to stardom was almost accidental. At 18, a portrait of Ava taken by her brother-in-law was displayed in a photography studio's window in New York City. A passerby from MGM spotted it and was so captivated that he urged her to audition for the studio. Soon after, Ava signed a contract with MGM and found herself in Hollywood. At first, the transition wasn't easy. Her thick Southern accent made speaking roles difficult, and she spent years in small, often uncredited parts. But her beauty was undeniable, and the studio recognized that it had something rare on its hands. By the mid-1940s, Ava Gardner was being groomed as MGM's next great star. It was The Killers, 1946. That turned her into a sensation. Playing the sultry femme fatale opposite Burt Lancaster, Ava captivated audiences with her lethal allure. She embodied danger wrapped in silk, a woman who could destroy a man with a single glance. Hollywood loved archetypes, and Ava became its ultimate seductress, the kind of woman who could never be tamed, on screen or off. She followed this with performances in films like The Barefoot Contessa, 1954. Where she played a glamorous dancer-turned-movie star whose personal life spirals into tragedy. These roles mirrored the press's portrayal of Ava herself, wild, unpredictable, and endlessly desirable. But Ava Gardner's life off-screen was just as dramatic as anything the movies could invent. Her personal life became a tabloid goldmine, filled with high-profile marriages, passionate affairs, and public heartbreaks. Her first marriage was to Mickey Rooney in 1942, when she was just 19 years old. Rooney was one of MGM's biggest stars at the time, but their marriage quickly unraveled. Rooney's infidelity and immaturity clashed with Ava's desire for something deeper, and they divorced a year later. Still, the marriage set the tone for Ava's reputation, one of glamour, chaos, and endless gossip. Her second marriage was to bandleader Artie Shaw in 1945. Shaw was brilliant but notoriously controlling. He often criticized Ava's lack of formal education, pushing her to read more and better herself. While she admired his intellect, their relationship was tumultuous. Ava later admitted that their marriage was a mismatch of personalities, her fiery independence clashing with his domineering nature. It lasted barely a year. But it was Ava's third marriage, to singer Frank Sinatra, that defined her romantic life in the eyes of the public. Their relationship was the stuff of tabloid legend, passionate, volatile, and filled with both love and destruction. Sinatra left his wife Nancy for Ava, sparking public outrage and nearly derailing his career. But the chemistry between Ava and Frank was undeniable. They fought fiercely, loved intensely, and drove each other to the brink of despair. Their arguments were notorious, sometimes spilling into public view, while their reconciliations were just as dramatic. Ava once quipped, "We had a very violent marriage." Very violent. It was a series of battles. Yet despite their divorce in 1957, Ava always considered Sinatra the love of her life, and they remained close until her death. Beyond her marriages, Ava's name was linked to a long list of rumored affairs: Howard Hughes, Ernest Hemingway, even bullfighters and royalty. Whether true or not, the press devoured these stories, painting Ava as the ultimate Hollywood temptress who could have any man she desired. For gossip columnists, she was a dream, beautiful, unpredictable, and constantly in the company of fascinating men. To the public, she became the embodiment of the phrase, "too wild to tame." Her image as a femme fatale wasn't just a studio creation. It was reinforced by her real-life choices and her refusal to play the role of the docile Hollywood starlet. She drank heavily, smoked constantly, and spoke her mind with a sharpness that sometimes shocked polite company. Ava Gardner didn't hide her vices, and in doing so, she fed into the legend. Like Tallulah Bankhead before her, she lived openly, and the world watched with both admiration and judgment. Yet behind the image, there was another side to Ava. For all her confidence and allure, she was deeply insecure. She often downplayed her acting ability, once famously saying, "I don't know whether I'm good enough to be a star, but I've always been lucky." She struggled with the scrutiny of fame, craving privacy that was nearly impossible to find. Friends described her as warm, funny, and surprisingly down-to-earth in private, very different from the untouchable goddess she played on screen. She was also fiercely loyal to those she loved, standing by friends like Hemingway and Sinatra even in their darkest moments. Ava's search for peace eventually took her far from Hollywood. In the 1950s, she moved to Spain, where she immersed herself in the culture, befriended bullfighters, and sought an escape from the relentless American press. Later, she lived in London, where she enjoyed a quieter life in her later years, though health problems, particularly after a stroke in the 1980s, slowed her down. Still, even in retreat, Ava remained glamorous in the public imagination, her legend untarnished by time. Her legacy is one of contradictions. On the one hand, Ava Gardner was the quintessential Hollywood temptress, a woman whose beauty and sensuality defined an era. On the other, she was a private, insecure woman who often felt trapped by the very image that made her famous. She battled against the caricature of herself, yearning to be seen as more than just a scandalous headline or a femme fatale. Yet it was precisely that larger-than-life image that secured her place in Hollywood history. Ava Gardner shocked Hollywood not because she was wild, but because she refused to pretend otherwise. She didn't hide her flaws, her passions, or her mistakes. In an industry built on illusion, Ava's raw honesty about her relationships, her struggles, and her insecurities made her both vulnerable and iconic. She was human in a way that many stars were not allowed to be, and that humanity only deepened her allure. When Ava died in 1990, the obituaries remembered her not just as a great beauty, but as a woman who lived fully, fiercely, and unapologetically. She was remembered as the farm girl who became a goddess, the actress who embodied desire, and the woman who loved and lost on a scale as epic as any Hollywood script. In the end, Ava Gardner's life was both a cautionary tale and a legend. She was a woman who could never be contained by the roles Hollywood wrote for her, nor by the men who tried to hold her. She was the temptress of the silver screen, yes, but she was also a woman who craved something simpler: love, peace, and understanding. And it is that complexity, wild yet vulnerable, scandalous yet sincere, that keeps her story alive to this day. Marlene Dietrich was not simply a star. She was an enigma wrapped in silk, mystery, and smoke. Born in Berlin in 1901, she entered the world at a time when Europe was reshaping itself after the collapse of empires and the chaos of war. Her early life was marked by a conventional upbringing: music lessons, finishing school, and a strict Prussian family that emphasized discipline and propriety. But young Marlene had little interest in convention. Drawn to performance, she flirted with acting and music before finally embracing the stage and screen. By the late 1920s, she had begun carving out a reputation in Germany as a striking beauty with a husky voice and a knack for captivating audiences. Her big break came in 1930 with The Blue Angel, directed by Joseph von Sternberg. Playing the cabaret singer Lola Lola, she was magnetic, sultry, and dangerous. When she appeared on screen in top hat and stockings, cigarette dangling from her lips, she became an instant sensation. The film catapulted her to international fame, and Paramount quickly brought her to Hollywood. From the start, she was marketed not just as a star, but as something exotic, foreign, and untouchable, a glamorous export from decadent Berlin. Dietrich's arrival in Hollywood coincided with the studio's growing appetite for personalities that could be branded, sold, and mythologized. Paramount leaned heavily into her aura of mystery and sensuality. She wasn't positioned as the sweet ingenue or the all-American girl next door. Instead, she was the woman of the world, the seductress, the figure who blurred lines and shattered conventions. Audiences weren't quite sure whether to fear her, desire her, or both, and that was exactly how she wanted it. From the beginning, rumors swirled about her relationships. Dietrich was linked to a dazzling array of lovers, both male and female. On the men's side, the list included Hollywood legends like John Wayne, Douglas Fairbanks Jr., and even JFK. On the women's side, whispers tied her to Greta Garbo, Claudette Colbert, and writer Mercedes de Acosta. Whether or not all of these stories were true hardly mattered. What mattered was the perception that Marlene Dietrich was a bisexual icon before such a concept could be publicly acknowledged. She never confirmed the rumors, but she never denied them either. Instead, she leaned into the ambiguity, letting the world wonder while she carefully curated her image as a woman who belonged to no one and everyone. Her bisexual legend wasn't just about gossip. It was embedded in her style and performances. Dietrich was famous for her androgyny. She wore trousers and tailored suits in an era when women were expected to wear skirts and dresses. She blurred gender lines with an ease that shocked conservative audiences but fascinated others. In Morocco, 1930, she famously kissed another woman on screen, a moment that was both scandalous and groundbreaking. She understood the power of presentation. Clothes were not just fashion for her, they were statements. A tuxedo could be more seductive than a gown, a bowler hat more dangerous than a string of pearls. This reinvention of femininity made her irresistible to both men and women. Admirers saw in her a freedom they craved, the freedom to step outside the boundaries of gender and sexuality, to live without apology. For Hollywood, her style was a marketing tool. Paramount leaned into her exotic allure, promoting her as a figure of mystery, sophistication, and danger. Dietrich herself helped build this persona, carefully choosing her roles and cultivating her image as something just beyond reach. But her life was not just a sequence of affairs and glamorous outfits. Dietrich was also fiercely political and deeply principled. When the Nazis rose to power in Germany, she rejected their attempts to lure her back as a cultural icon. Instead, she became an American citizen and an outspoken critic of Hitler. During World War II, she performed tirelessly for Allied troops, often close to the front lines, singing in her signature husky voice to soldiers who adored her. For her efforts, she was awarded the U.S. Medal of Freedom and France's Légion d'honneur. In that sense, she was more than just a screen siren. She was a symbol of resistance, courage, and loyalty. Yet even this side of her fed into the enigma. Was she the seductive Lola Lola, the dangerous femme fatale in a tuxedo, or the patriotic entertainer giving her heart to soldiers on the battlefield? The truth was that she was all of them. Marlene Dietrich lived a life of contradictions, and she reveled in them. She was both private and public, scandalous and principled, alluring and aloof. The mystery surrounding her relationships persisted throughout her life. She had long-lasting friendships and affairs, but she also cultivated distance. Part of her allure was that no one ever quite knew the full story. Did she truly have affairs with the long list of celebrities whispered about in Hollywood circles? Or did she let the rumors swirl because they added to her mystique? Dietrich herself once said, "I am at heart a gentleman," a sly acknowledgement of her fluid identity that only deepened the fascination. Her later years were quieter, spent mostly in Paris in self-imposed seclusion. After a fall in the 1970s left her unable to perform, she withdrew from public life, rarely appearing in interviews or public events. Yet even in her absence, her legend grew. She became a figure people projected their fantasies onto, a mirror of desire, mystery, and rebellion. In her final years, she rarely left her apartment, communicating mostly through letters and phone calls. But when she died in 1992, the world mourned not just a star, but an idea. The idea of a woman who had lived life on her own terms, unapologetically and enigmatically. Marlene Dietrich remains one of the most enduring icons of old Hollywood, precisely because she was never just one thing. She was the Berlin-born star who conquered Hollywood, the bisexual legend who blurred gender lines, the fashion revolutionary who made trousers seductive, the patriot who sang for soldiers, and the recluse who cultivated mystery until the very end. What set her apart from her contemporaries was her ability to control her image. Where others were trapped by gossip, Dietrich used gossip as a tool. She fed it, shaped it, and allowed it to expand her legend. The rumors of her affairs, the fascination with her style, the questions about her identity, all of it was part of a carefully orchestrated performance. She lived her life like a work of art, deliberately unfinished, open to interpretation. And that is why Marlene Dietrich continues to fascinate. She wasn't just glamorous, she wasn't just scandalous, and she wasn't just talented. She was a mystery, a woman who embodied contradictions and forced the world to confront them. In a Hollywood built on illusion, Dietrich's greatest trick was to make her illusion inseparable from her reality. She was and remains the androgynous lover, the enigmatic siren, the woman who never let the world pin her down. Hollywood in its golden age was never just about movies. It was about myths, carefully manufactured stories that turned ordinary men and women into gods and goddesses of the screen. Audiences bought their tickets not only for the films but for the fantasies surrounding the stars, their beauty, their charisma, their forbidden romances. Yet behind the glitter, behind the posters and headlines, lay a cruel machine. That machine knew one thing for certain. Sex sells. And for women especially, nothing fueled the gossip columns more than being painted as the star who slept with everyone. Marilyn Monroe, Mae West, Tallulah Bankhead, Ava Gardner, Marlene Dietrich. These women were more than actresses. They were stories, spectacles, projections of desire and fear. Hollywood made them larger than life but also trapped them in cages built of rumor. A blonde bombshell. A bawdy comedienne. A wild child. A femme fatale. An androgynous seductress. These weren't just roles on screen. They became identities forced onto the women themselves. The narrative was seductive, that they were available to all, insatiable, dangerous in their appetites. But the truth was more complicated. Marilyn wanted love and stability more than anything, yet the world only wanted to imagine her in the arms of powerful men. Mae West cleverly wrote her own double entendres and turned scandal into her armor, yet the gossip machine reduced her to little more than a bawdy joke. Tallulah Bankhead refused to hide her pleasures, her vices, her sharp tongue, but in doing so became Hollywood's shorthand for excess. Ava Gardner battled insecurity while being branded as the untamable temptress. And Marlene Dietrich, always in control, used gossip to craft her own legend but still paid the price of being forever shrouded in mystery. Her true self buried beneath layers of speculation. In every case, these women were punished for their freedom. The studio system loved to use their sexuality to sell films, but it also worked tirelessly to shame them for stepping outside prescribed boundaries. The double standard was glaring. Men in Hollywood were celebrated for their affairs, their conquests, their larger-than-life appetites. Women, on the other hand, were condemned, scandalized, and forever branded as immoral. The phrase "she slept with everyone" was not just gossip. It was a weapon. A way to diminish talent, to control careers, to remind the audience that no matter how powerful a woman might appear, she was still vulnerable to public judgment. And yet, despite the cruelty of the system, these women refused to be tamed. They bent rules, broke barriers, and carved out identities that were far more complicated than the caricatures Hollywood sold. Mae West wrote plays so provocative they landed her in jail. Dietrich crossed gender boundaries decades before conversations about fluidity entered mainstream culture. Ava Gardner defied MGM's attempts to shape her into a sanitized version of herself, choosing instead to live boldly, for better or worse. Tallulah Bankhead turned her own outrageousness into performance art. And Marilyn Monroe, perhaps the most tragic of them all, tried desperately to prove she was more than a sex symbol, founding her own production company and fighting for serious roles. What ties them together is not promiscuity, but defiance. They refused to live quietly, to hide their desires, or to fit neatly into the boxes Hollywood built. And in doing so, they paid a price. Reputations scarred, personal lives haunted, careers sabotaged. The myth of sleeping with everyone was never really about who they loved or how they lived. It was about control by studios, by the press, by a culture that feared women who owned their independence. But here is the irony. The very rumors meant to diminish them are what made them immortal. To this day, their names conjure fascination. Their images remain timeless. Their scandals, real or imagined, are still whispered about, not as shame but as legend. What once condemned them has, over time, become part of their power. They are remembered not just for their films, but for their audacity to live in a world that wanted them silenced. In the end, the price of scandal was steep. It cost some their peace of mind, others their privacy, and in Monroe's case, perhaps even her life. But scandal also ensured they could never be erased. They became symbols, not of submission, but of rebellion. They proved that Hollywood could market their bodies, but it could never contain their spirits. And so, when we look back on these women, we must see beyond the gossip. They were not just lovers, not just sirens, not just objects of desire. They were pioneers, women who demanded to live as they wished, who challenged the hypocrisies of their era, who blurred lines and expanded possibilities for those who came after them. The truth is, they didn't belong to everyone. They belonged to themselves. And that is precisely why Hollywood feared them.